I met Brandon at Barnes& Noble on a Tuesday afternoon when my life felt like it was falling apart. 3 months had passed since Derek finalized our divorce, and I was still reeling from 6 years of his lies and betrayals. There I was, browsing the self-help section like some kind of cliche, when this genuinely nice guy noticed me crying over a book about healing from infidelity. Brandon was different from Derek in every way that mattered. Where Derek was flashy and unpredictable, Brandon was steady and reliable. He had kind eyes behind his glasses and this gentle way of speaking that made me feel safe for the first time in years. When he offered to buy me coffee and just listen, I knew I'd found someone who actually understood what it meant to be hurt by someone you trusted completely. "I'm so sorry you went through that," he said after I told him about Derek's affairs. His lies, the way he'd gaslit me for years. No one deserves to be treated that way. Finally, someone who got it. Someone who saw me as the victim I was, not the crazy, paranoid wife Derek had painted me as to justify his cheating. We started dating slowly, which I appreciated. Brandon never pushed for anything physical, never made me feel rushed or pressured. He was patient with my trust issues and understanding when I needed reassurance. About 6 months in, we were lying on his couch after dinner when I felt that familiar anxiety creeping up my chest. "Brandon, promise me you'll never cheat on me," I said, turning to face him. "I won't survive it again." He looked at me with such sincerity. "But I'm not Derek. I'm not going to cheat. I want to believe that," I whispered, and he pulled me closer. "You can believe it. I would never hurt you like that." Those promises became our routine. Whenever I felt that spike of panic, that fear that history might repeat itself, Brandon would reassure me. He understood that after what Derek put me through, I needed extra security. When I started checking his phone occasionally, he didn't get defensive like Derek used to. When I asked about his female coworkers or wanted to know who he was texting, he was always transparent. "I just need to know you're different," I'd explain. And he'd nod like he truly understood. "I am different? You never have to worry about me." Some people might have called my behavior controlling, but they didn't understand what it was like to be systematically lied to and manipulated for years. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being smart. I knew the warning signs now, and I wasn't going to ignore them ever again. When Brandon started hanging out with his coworker Abby after work, I expressed my concerns. She was single, attractive, and clearly had a thing for him even if he was too oblivious to see it. Instead of dismissing my feelings like Derek would have, Brandon actually listened. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I'll keep things professional," he said. "Your peace of mind is more important than any friendship." See, this is what a good partner does. They prioritize their relationship and their partner's emotional well-being. Derek never would have made that sacrifice. Our engagement year was blissful. Brandon proposed with a simple but beautiful ring. Nothing flashy or attention-seeking like Derek would have chosen. We planned a small wedding, focused on what actually mattered, our commitment to each other. I felt secure enough to start trusting again, though I still kept an eye on things. That's just good sense after what I'd been through. "Promise me we'll always be honest with each other," I said the night before our wedding. "Always," Brandon replied. "No secrets, no lies. We're a team." The first 5 years of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. Brandon kept his promises. He came home every night, never gave me reason to doubt him, and held me when I had nightmares about Derek's betrayals. Sometimes I'd have episodes where the old trauma would resurface, and Brandon would just hold me while I cried. He really messed me up. I'd sob into his chest. "I know, baby, but that's over now. You're safe with me." Brandon understood that healing isn't linear. Some days were better than others, but he never made me feel like I was being dramatic or dwelling on the past. He got that Derek's betrayal had fundamentally changed me, and he worked to rebuild my ability to trust. Everything was going so well until that night in our 6th year, when I made the mistake of checking Facebook. I wasn't looking for Derek, honestly. I barely thought about him anymore. But there it was, right in my feed. Derek's engagement announcement. He was grinning in the photo with some blonde woman, looking happier than he'd ever looked with me. The rage hit me like a physical blow. After everything he'd put me through, after destroying my ability to trust, after 6 years of therapy and healing, he got to just move on. He got his happy ending with someone else while I was still dealing with the damage he'd caused. I was sobbing at my computer when Brandon found me. "Haley, what's wrong?" I quickly closed the browser, wiping my eyes. Nothing. Just work stress. But Brandon had seen the tabs. "Were you looking at Derek's Facebook?" "No. Why would I care? I haven't thought about him in forever," I snapped, then immediately felt defensive. "You shouldn't go through my tabs." "Brandon, that's invasive." The irony wasn't lost on me even then, but I was too upset to care about being consistent. Brandon backed off, but I could tell he was confused by my reaction. How could I explain that seeing Derek happy felt like a betrayal of everything I'd suffered? That it invalidated all the pain he'd caused me? Brandon wouldn't understand. He'd never been betrayed like I had. That's when I decided I needed to do something for myself. I was 32 years old, and I'd spent the last 6 years healing from Derek's damage and the past 5 years being the perfect, grateful wife to Brandon. When was the last time I'd felt attractive, desired, alive? I joined a gym and started working out religiously. Brandon seemed surprised by the sudden change. "This is new," he said, watching me get ready for another workout session. "I'm just trying to feel good about myself again. You should be supportive." And he was supportive, even though I could tell he didn't really understand the urgency I felt. I needed to prove to myself that I was still desirable, that Derek leaving me wasn't some reflection of my worth as a woman. I started keeping my phone under my pillow at night and being more private about my messages, not because I was doing anything wrong, but because I needed some space to rediscover who I was outside of being Derek's victim and Brandon's grateful wife. Then Derek texted me. I stared at his message for a full 10 minutes before opening it. "Hey, Haley, I know this is out of the blue, but I've been thinking about you. I heard through mutual friends that you remarried. I hope you're happy. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and I owe you a huge apology for how things ended. Would you be open to meeting for coffee sometime? I understand if you'd rather not." My hands were shaking as I read it. After all these years, he wanted to apologize. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it never happened. But a bigger part of me, the part that had never gotten closure, never gotten the acknowledgement I deserved, was curious. I waited 3 days before responding. "I suppose I could hear what you have to say." We met at a restaurant across town, somewhere Brandon would never go. Derek looked good, older, more mature somehow. The cocky arrogance that used to attract and repel me had been replaced by something that seemed like genuine remorse. "I was a terrible husband," he said without preamble. "I cheated on you, lied to you, gaslit you when you confronted me. You deserve so much better than what I gave you." Finally, someone was acknowledging what I'd been through. "You destroyed my ability to trust." I told him. "Do you know what that's like? To question every interaction, every text message, every time your partner is 5 minutes late. I can't imagine," he said, and his eyes were actually wet. "I'm so sorry." "Haley." I was selfish and immature, and I hurt the best thing that ever happened to me. We talked for 2 hours. Derek told me about the therapy he'd been in, the work he'd done to understand why he'd been so destructive. He seemed like a completely different person from the man who'd betrayed me repeatedly. "I know I have no right to ask," he said as we were leaving, "but could we do this again sometime? I feel like I'm finally able to give you the respect and attention you always deserved." I should have said no. I should have gotten my closure and walked away. But something about seeing Derek, the real Derek, not the selfish boy he'd been, awakened feelings I'd thought were dead and buried. "Maybe," I said. That night, Brandon asked about my girls' night. "How was dinner with Sarah?" He asked casually. "Fine. Good to catch up," I replied, hating how easily the lie came. But it wasn't really lying. Was it? I was processing something important, working through trauma that had shaped my entire adult life. Brandon wouldn't understand. He'd never been betrayed the way I had. He'd probably just get jealous and insecure, maybe even try to forbid me from getting the closure I needed. Derek and I started meeting regularly. Just coffee, just talking. He was like a different person, attentive, thoughtful, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen for him in the first place. "You seem different too," he said during our third meeting. "More confident." "Marriage suits you. Brandon's a good man," I said automatically. "But," Derek prompted, because he'd always been able to read me. "But he's safe." "Predictable?" Sometimes I feel like I'm sleepwalking through my life. Derek reached across the table and touched my hand. "You were always too vibrant for a boring life." The first time we kissed, I told myself it was just closure, just proving to myself that I was over him, that he couldn't affect me anymore. But when Derek suggested we get a hotel room, I didn't say no. "I've missed you," he whispered afterward, and I realized I'd missed this version of him too, the passionate, intense connection we'd had before his betrayals poisoned everything. This wasn't cheating, I told myself. This was healing. This was taking back power that Derek had stolen from me years ago. Brandon would never understand, because Brandon had never been broken the way I had. For 2 months, I lived in both worlds. At home, I was Brandon's wife, reliable, predictable, grateful for his steadiness. With Derek, I was alive again, desirable, exciting, worthy of passion and intensity. Brandon started asking more questions about my girls' nights and gym sessions, which honestly felt invasive and controlling. After everything I'd been through, The last thing I needed was another man trying to monitor my every move. "You've been different lately," he said one night. Distant. "I'm just working through some things," I told him. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." But how could I explain that his emotional unavailability had left me vulnerable to reconnecting with Derek? That maybe if he'd been more attentive, more passionate, more present in our marriage, I wouldn't have needed to seek that connection elsewhere. Instead, I deflected. "You're being paranoid?" Just like Derek used to be. That shut him down. As I knew it would. Brandon hated being compared to Derek. The irony was that while I was finally feeling alive again, finally processing my unfinished business with Derek, Brandon was becoming suspicious and distant. It was like he could sense something had changed, but couldn't put his finger on what. "Promise me you're not hiding anything from me," he said one night. Those familiar words taking on a different weight. "Of course not," I replied. "Why would you even ask that?" "I don't know. You just seem different." Different how? Secretive. Like you're living some other life I don't know about. The accusation stung because it was partially true, but not in the way he thought. I wasn't betraying our marriage. I was healing from wounds that predated him. I was reclaiming parts of myself that Derek's original betrayal had buried. "You're being ridiculous," I told him. "I'm the same person I've always been." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Being with Derek again had reminded me of who I used to be before trauma made me small and grateful and constantly afraid. Maybe that's what Brandon was sensing. That I was no longer content to be his rescued victim. Derek made me feel beautiful, desired, worthy of grand gestures and passionate love. With him, I wasn't damaged goods who should be grateful for basic kindness. I was a woman worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth the effort Derek was finally making. "Leave him," Derek said one afternoon as we lay tangled in hotel sheets. "You're wasting your life with someone who doesn't appreciate what he has." "It's complicated," I said, though part of me was already imagining it. Love shouldn't be complicated. It should be consuming, overwhelming, worth risking everything for. Brandon had never made me feel like I was worth risking everything for. He'd married me because I was safe, grateful, easy to please after Derek's abuse. But I deserved more than being someone's safe choice. I was getting careless, staying out later, being less careful about my stories. Part of me almost wanted Brandon to figure it out so I wouldn't have to be the one to end things. Let him be the one to walk away this time. Then one morning, I came downstairs to find photographs spread across our kitchen table. Pictures of me and Derek at restaurants, going into hotels, kissing in parking lots. My blood turned to ice as I stared at the evidence of my private healing process, displayed like some kind of crime scene. There was a note in Brandon's handwriting. "You became the monster you claimed to hate." His clothes were gone from our closet. His toothbrush missing from the bathroom. When I tried calling his phone, it went straight to a generic voicemail. He'd blocked me. The betrayal was stunning. Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to understand what I was going through, Brandon had hired someone to spy on me. He'd violated my privacy in the most invasive way possible, then had the audacity to judge me for seeking the healing I needed. I drove to his brother Mike's house, knowing that's where he'd go. Mike answered the door with a cold expression I'd never seen before. "He doesn't want to talk to you," Mike said. "He doesn't understand," I pleaded. "I can explain everything. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you cheated on my brother with your ex-husband for months, while making him promise he'd never cheat on you," Mike said flatly. "What part of that needs explaining?" "It's more complicated than that. I was processing trauma, working through unfinished business. Derek and I needed closure." "Closure?" Mike shook his head. "Right. Well, Brandon's got his closure now, too." 2 weeks later, Brandon ambushed me in the parking lot of his lawyer's office. He looked terrible, thinner, exhausted, but somehow more resolved than I'd ever seen him. "Brandon, please," I said, approaching his car. "We need to talk about this." He rolled down his window just enough to speak. "I gave you 8 years of reassurance. 8 years of never cheating. 8 years of holding you while you cried over another man. And you still chose to crawl back to him. You don't understand what this was about." I tried to explain. I needed to heal, to process what he did to me. "You were never supposed to get hurt." "I'm done understanding," Brandon said quietly. "I'm done making excuses for you. I'm done being your emotional support animal while you figured out your feelings for the man who destroyed you. That's not fair," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You know what Derek put me through. You know how damaged I was when we met. And I spent 8 years helping you heal. 8 years proving that not all men are Derek. And the second he showed you attention, you threw it all away." Brandon put his car in reverse. "The divorce papers are filed. Don't contact me again." He drove away and never looked back. The divorce was swift and brutal. Brandon had evidence of everything. The private investigator had been thorough. My lawyer advised me not to contest anything, said it would just drag things out and cost more money. Derek's engagement to his blonde fiancée proceeded as planned. Apparently, his apologies and promises of change were just another manipulation, another way to get what he wanted. The moment Brandon filed for divorce, Derek stopped returning my calls. "This is complicated," he said the last time we spoke. "Maybe we should take a break until things settle down." Of course. He'd gotten what he wanted, the thrill of the affair, the ego boost of winning me back from my husband. And now that there were real consequences, he was running again, just like always. 6 months later, I'm living alone in a small apartment, starting over at 38. Through mutual friends, I heard that Brandon lost 18 pounds after our divorce, started sleeping better, even began writing again, something he'd given up during our marriage because I'd always interrupted him when he was trying to work. He spends weekends with his Uncle Ray in the countryside, apparently happier than anyone's seen him in years. Meanwhile, I'm back in therapy, trying to process not just Derek's original betrayal, but the way everyone abandoned me when I needed support most. Brandon never tried to understand what I was going through. He never considered that maybe his emotional unavailability had contributed to my vulnerability. Instead, he hired a private investigator and collected evidence like I was some kind of criminal instead of a woman trying to heal from trauma. Derek showed me just enough attention to reopen old wounds, then disappeared the moment things got complicated. Classic Derek, all passion and intensity until real life intrudes. Even my friends took Brandon's side, like I'd committed some unforgivable sin instead of just trying to work through complex emotions with someone who'd shaped my entire understanding of love and betrayal. Everyone wants to make me the villain in this story, but they don't understand what it's like to carry the kind of damage Derek inflicted on me. They don't understand that healing isn't linear, that sometimes you have to go backward to move forward. I wasn't trying to hurt Brandon. I was trying to heal myself. If he'd been more emotionally available, more attentive to my needs, maybe I wouldn't have been so vulnerable when Derek reappeared. But instead of looking at his own shortcomings, he chose to play the victim and walk away. Now I'm alone again, just like I was after Derek's first betrayal. Except this time, I don't have anyone holding me while I cry. I don't have anyone promising me that not all men are liars and cheaters. I have to rebuild my life from scratch. Again, while everyone acts like I'm the monster. Maybe someday people will understand that I was just trying to survive, just trying to make sense of the trauma that's defined my adult life. Maybe someday they'll see that I was the real victim all along of Derek's manipulation, of Brandon's emotional neglect, of everyone's inability to understand complex human emotions. But probably not. It's easier to judge than to understand. It's easier to call someone a cheater than to examine the circumstances that led to their choices. So here I am, starting over again, carrying the weight of everyone else's betrayals and abandonment, still trying to heal, still trying to find someone who will understand that love isn't always simple, that healing isn't always pretty, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the first ones to walk away when things get complicated.